I'm Megan, 28, and 3 months ago my entire life changed during what should have been a normal family dinner. The tension in my childhood home had been building for weeks, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. None of us knew that night would end with my parents delivering an ultimatum that would shatter our family. Give up your room or get out of this house. The choice I made in that moment redefined everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and self-worth. Before I get into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever had to make a tough choice between family and self-respect, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Growing up in the Murphy household was relatively normal on the surface. My dad, Jason, worked as a regional manager at a manufacturing company, while my mom, Karen, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. I'm the oldest of 3 children, with my sister Emma being 4 years younger and my brother Tyler trailing behind at 19. Our suburban home in Connecticut wasn't lavish, but it was comfortable, with enough space for each of us to have our own bedrooms. My childhood memories are filled with backyard barbecues, holiday celebrations where my mom went all out with decorations, and weekend trips to visit my grandparents at their lakeside cottage. Dad coached Tyler's Little League team, Mom led Emma's Girl Scout troop, and I was the bookworm who found my place in the school newspaper and debate club. We weren't perfect, but we were functional at least. That's what I always believed. I never planned to move back home at 28. After college, I built a promising career in marketing for a tech startup in Boston. I had my own apartment, a decent social life, and was steadily building my savings. Then the pandemic hit, followed by an economic downturn. Our company lost major clients, and despite my performance reviews always being stellar, I found myself among the last wave of layoffs when the company finally folded. The timing couldn't have been worse. My lease was ending, my savings had taken a hit from some medical bills earlier that year, and the job market was flooded with qualified professionals all competing for too few positions. After a month of unsuccessful job hunting and temporary gigs, I swallowed my pride and called my parents. "Of course you can come home, honey," my mother had said, her voice warm with concern. "It'll just be temporary until you get back on your feet." The arrangement seemed reasonable. I would pay $400 monthly toward household expenses, help with chores, and actively pursue employment. My old bedroom remained largely unchanged since high school, though my parents had removed some furniture to create a small home office space in one corner. I transported my essential belongings from Boston and tried to settle back into a life I thought I'd left behind. My bedroom became my sanctuary during those first few months. The pale blue walls still held posters from my college years and shelves of books I'd accumulated. I set up my laptop on the small desk by the window that overlooked our backyard maple tree, the same view that had watched me grow up. I added touches of my adult life. My professional certifications hung beside high school diplomas, and photographs of friends from Boston found space among family pictures. At first, everything was fine. Mom seemed to enjoy having someone to cook with again. Dad and I bonded over evening news discussions. Tyler, who was taking classes at the community college, appreciated having someone to proofread his essays. Even my relationship with Emma seemed cordial during her occasional visits. Emma had always been the social butterfly of the family. Pretty, popular, and personable, she married right after college to Eric, an investment banker whose family had old money. Their wedding 2 years ago was an elaborate affair that my parents talked about for months afterward. They now lived in a sprawling home in a wealthy neighborhood about 30 minutes away, with Emma working part-time at a boutique owned by her mother-in-law. The dynamic between us had always been complicated. Growing up, Emma seemed to resent being in my shadow academically, while I secretly envied her effortless social grace. Our parents tried not to play favorites, but there was an unspoken preference for Emma's achievements that were more visible and traditional homecoming queen, cheer captain, young bride, compared to my more intellectual pursuits. By my 4th month at home, I could feel my parents' patience wearing thin. The subtle comments began to surface during dinner conversations. "Any updates on the job front?" Dad would ask, his tone slightly more pointed each time. "Emma and Eric just booked their 2nd vacation this year," Mom would mention, while I counted pennies and applied for positions well below my qualification level. Then came the comparisons. When Emma was between jobs, she volunteered at the community center. Have you thought about doing something like that? I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that Emma had been between jobs because she chose to quit, cushioned by her husband's substantial income. My situation was entirely different, but highlighting that distinction would only make me sound bitter and defensive. The tension escalated when Emma started visiting more frequently. She'd examine my resume and offer unsolicited advice. You should really consider taking anything at this point, Megan. Gaps in employment look terrible. Her concern seemed genuine on the surface, but I couldn't miss the subtle satisfaction in her expression when discussing my struggles. One Sunday afternoon, I overheard Emma and my mother talking in the kitchen while I was upstairs. I just worry about her, Emma said, voice lowered but still audible. She seems stuck, you know? Maybe you and Dad have made it too comfortable for her here. My mother sighed. We're just trying to support her through a rough patch. I know, Mom, but sometimes support looks like a push out of the nest. Ryan's cousin was unemployed for just 6 weeks before he took a job stocking shelves overnight. Sometimes pride has to take a back seat. I retreated to my room, stomach churning with indignation and shame. Little did I know, Emma wasn't just concerned about my employment status, she had her own agenda brewing, one that would soon collide with my precarious situation. 3 weeks before everything fell apart, my parents invited the family over for Sunday dinner. I'd spent the afternoon applying for jobs, feeling cautiously optimistic about a marketing coordinator position I'd interviewed for the previous Friday. The hiring manager had seemed impressed with my portfolio and mentioned they'd be making a decision within 2 weeks. I helped Mom prepare pot roast, her specialty, while Dad and Tyler set up the dining room table with the good dishes, a signal that something significant was happening. When Emma and Eric arrived, she was practically glowing, clutching a bottle of expensive champagne. We have some exciting news, Emma announced once we were all seated. She looked at Eric, who nodded encouragingly. We're finally renovating our master suite. We're expanding the bathroom, adding a walk-in closet, and creating a little sitting area with a fireplace. My parents erupted in congratulations while I offered a polite smile. The renovation itself wasn't surprising. Emma and Eric were constantly upgrading their already luxurious home, but I didn't understand why this warranted a special family dinner announcement. That sounds lovely, sweetheart, Mom said. When does construction start? That's actually why we wanted to talk to everyone, Emma replied, her eyes briefly flickering to me. The contractors are starting in 2 weeks, and they say it'll take about a month, maybe 6 weeks. The dust and noise will be impossible to live with. Dad nodded sympathetically. Home renovations are always a headache. So Emma continued, we were hoping we could stay here during the construction. Just temporarily, of course. Of course you can, Mom exclaimed before anyone else could speak. You know you're always welcome here. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I was calculating what this would mean for my daily routine and job search. Our parents' house wasn't tiny, but it wasn't designed for 2 additional adults either. The guest room was small, with just a twin bed and minimal storage space. Then Emma dropped the bomb. Actually, she said, looking directly at me now, I was hoping we could use Megan's room. The guest room is really too small for both of us, especially since we'll need to bring some of our clothes and things. The table fell silent. I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my response. I carefully placed my fork down, taking a moment to process what she was suggesting. I'm sorry, but I don't think that would work, I said calmly. I'm in the middle of my job search. I need my computer setup and workspace. The guest room doesn't have a desk or enough space for my materials. Emma's smile tightened. You could set up temporarily in the basement. There's that folding table down there you could use. The basement was unfinished, with concrete floors, poor lighting, and occasionally damp when it rained heavily. It was where we stored holiday decorations and old furniture, not a functional living space. I need privacy and a proper workspace for video interviews, I explained. The basement isn't suitable for that. Dad cleared his throat. Megan, your sister and Eric need somewhere to stay. It's just for a month or so. I understand that, I replied. But why can't they use the guest room? Or rent a short-term apartment? They certainly have the means to do so. Emma's face flushed. We're trying to save money for the renovation. You know how expensive these projects get. What about your parents' lake house? I asked Eric directly. Isn't it empty most of the time? Eric looked uncomfortable. My parents are using it this season. They're staying through the fall. I turned back to my parents. I'm sorry, but I really need my space right now. My job search is my priority, and I can't conduct professional interviews from the basement. Mom's expression hardened. Megan, after everything we've done for you these past few months, I'm surprised you're not willing to make this small sacrifice for your sister. Her words stung like a physical slap. Small sacrifice? You're asking me to give up my privacy, my workspace, and move into an unfinished basement while I'm trying to rebuild my career. It's just temporary, Emma interjected, her tone artificially sweet. And let's be honest, Megan, I'm the one with a actual home to return to. You're just staying here until you figure things out. The implication was clear. My sister was the successful one with a real life, while I was just floating in limbo. My cheeks burned with humiliation. I pay rent to stay here, I said quietly. We had an agreement. Dad sighed heavily. No one's saying you don't contribute, but family helps family. Emma would do the same for you. Would she? I sincerely doubted Emma would give up her master suite if I needed a place to stay. But pointing this out would only make me seem petty. What about the office downstairs? I suggested, trying to find a compromise. I could move my computer setup there and share common spaces more consciously. My parents exchanged glances, clearly dissatisfied with this solution, but Emma surprisingly nodded. That could work for now, she said, though her tone suggested this discussion wasn't over. The remainder of dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk. Eric talked about his latest promotion, while my parents beamed with pride. Tyler remained silent throughout, texting under the table. I offered to clean up afterward, needing some space to process what had just happened. As I loaded the dishwasher, Emma came in to deposit her and Eric's plates. I really appreciate you being flexible, she said, though her eyes held a gleam that made me uneasy. It means a lot to have family you can count on. After they left, I retreated to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, a knot forming in my stomach. The conversation had revealed something unsettling about my place in the family hierarchy. Despite being the older sibling, despite paying rent, despite my genuine need for a proper workspace, my requirements were considered secondary to Emma's convenience. That night, I couldn't sleep, replaying the dinner conversation in my head. Around midnight, my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from the company I'd interviewed with, asking me to come in for a second, final round interview the following week. Despite the tension with my family, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe things were finally turning around professionally. If I could secure this job, I could start planning my exit strategy, find my own place again, and restore the natural order of our family dynamics. Little did I know that Emma's request was just the first betrayal in a series of events that would test my boundaries, my relationship with my family, and ultimately my sense of self-worth. 2 weeks after the uncomfortable family dinner, I was meticulously preparing for my final interview with MarketSphere Digital. I'd researched the company extensively, practiced answers to potential questions, and even splurged on a new navy blazer that I'd carefully selected to project confidence and professionalism. The position offered a competitive salary that would allow me to move out within a couple of months if I landed it. Every detail mattered, from my portfolio presentation to my appearance. The night before Emma and Eric were scheduled to move in temporarily, I laid out my interview outfit on the back of my desk chair. The new blazer, a cream blouse, and gray slacks. My portfolio was printed and organized in a leather folder, and I'd even prepared questions to ask the hiring panel. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope about my professional future. That hope dimmed considerably when Emma arrived the next morning with not just a suitcase but 4 large boxes. "What's all this?" I asked as Eric carried the 3rd box into the foyer. "I thought you were just bringing clothes and essentials." Emma waved dismissively. "Just some things we need to keep dust-free during the renovation. Mom said we could store them here." Before I could respond, Mom appeared from the kitchen. "Megan, could you help your sister get settled in the guest room?" I bit my tongue and grabbed one of the smaller boxes, following Emma upstairs. The guest room was indeed small, with just enough space for a twin bed, nightstand, and dresser. Emma surveyed it with poorly concealed disappointment. "This is going to be tight," she muttered, pushing the boxes into a corner. "You're welcome to stay at a hotel," I suggested, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She shot me a look. "Very funny. We're family, Megan. Families help each other through difficult times." The irony of her lecturing me about family support wasn't lost on me, but I chose not to engage. I had more important things to focus on, namely, my interview the next day. When I returned to my room later that afternoon after a quick grocery run, I immediately noticed something was wrong. My carefully laid out interview outfit was no longer on the chair. Panic rising, I spotted my blazer and blouse crumpled on the bed, with a visible coffee stain spreading across the cream fabric of the blouse. "Mom?" I called out, rushing downstairs with the ruined blouse in hand. "What happened to my clothes?" Mom was in the living room, helping Emma arrange some of her decorative items on the mantel. They both looked up as I entered. "Oh no," Mom said, frowning at the stain. "What happened?" "That's what I'm asking. I left these on my chair for my interview tomorrow." Emma's eyes widened with recognition. "That might have been my fault. I needed to use your desk to organize some papers, and I moved your things to the bed. I must have accidentally spilled some coffee. I'm so sorry, Megan." The apology sounded hollow, especially given Emma's history of accidents that conveniently affected me during times of competition or importance. "This was brand new," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "I specifically bought it for this interview." "It's just a blouse," Mom interjected. "Can't you wear something else?" "That's not the point," I replied. Frustration building. My things should be respected in my own space. Emma's expression shifted to one of offense. "It was an accident, Megan. You're acting like I did it on purpose." "Did you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Mom gasped. "Megan, apologize to your sister right now. How dare you accuse her of such a thing?" I stood my ground. I left my clothes neatly arranged for an important interview. Why was Emma in my room at all? "I needed a quiet place to make a call," Emma explained. "My clients are very particular about background noise." "Your clients? I thought you only worked part-time at the boutique." Emma squared her shoulders. "I've actually been developing my own interior design consulting business. Some of Mom and Dad's friends have hired me to redo their spaces." This was news to me, though the way Mom beamed with pride suggested she'd known all along. "Isn't that wonderful?" Mom said. Emma's always had such an eye for design. I felt the familiar sting of being sidelined in my own family. "That still doesn't explain why you were using my desk when there's one in the office downstairs." "Dad was using it," Emma replied. "Look, I said I was sorry about the blouse. I'll even buy you a new one." "The interview is tomorrow," I reminded her. "There's no time." Mom sighed dramatically. "Megan, you need to grow up and be flexible. Accidents happen. Family shares spaces. This constant need for boundaries is becoming tiresome." I retreated to my room before I said something I'd regret, tears of frustration threatening to spill. Using cold water and stain remover, I managed to fade the coffee mark somewhat, but it remained visible enough to be unprofessional. I'd have to wear an older blouse that didn't coordinate as well with the blazer. The next day, as I prepared for my interview, I discovered more evidence of intrusion. My portfolio had been moved, pages slightly out of order. My laptop had been closed, forcing me to restart the presentation I'd been finalizing. Small things, easily explained away as helpful tidying, but disturbing nonetheless. The interview went poorly. I was distracted, on edge from the morning's discoveries, and less prepared than I'd planned to be. When asked about my greatest strength, I almost said maintaining boundaries before catching myself and offering a more conventional response about problem solving. The interviewers were polite but not enthusiastic, and I left knowing I hadn't presented my best self. When I returned home, deflated and upset, I found Emma sitting at my desk, using my laptop. "What are you doing?" I demanded from the doorway. She jumped slightly. "Oh, I needed to check my email and my phone was dead. I figured you wouldn't mind since you were out." "I do mind," I said firmly. "That's my personal computer with client work and private information." Emma rolled her eyes as she stood. "You're being dramatic. It's just a computer, and we're sisters. What are you hiding anyway?" That's not the point. This is my private property in my private room. About that, Emma said, lingering in the doorway. I've been thinking. This room would be perfect for storing some of our furniture during the renovation. The guest room is too small, and we have some pieces that need to stay indoors. I stared at her, incredulous. You want my room for storage? I thought you needed somewhere to stay. Emma had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Well, both, actually. Eric and I could stay at his parents' condo in the city during the week. He's closer to work there anyway, but we'd still need somewhere for our things, and we'd want to visit on weekends to, reconnect with family. The truth finally emerged. Emma didn't actually need to stay at our parents' house at all. This wasn't about necessity, it was about wanting what I had, as it had always been throughout our childhood. No, I said firmly. I'm not giving up my room for storage. That wasn't our agreement. It's not really your room, though, is it? Emma countered, her voice taking on a harder edge. It's Mom and Dad's house. You're just staying here temporarily. Before I could respond, I heard Mom calling from downstairs. Girls, is everything okay up there? Fine, Mom, Emma called back, then lowered her voice. Look, I didn't want to say this, but Mom and Dad have been talking about how long you've been here already. They had plans to convert your room into a proper home office before you moved back. You're delaying their retirement plans. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Had my parents really been discussing my departure behind my back? Was I truly overstaying my welcome, despite our agreement? That evening, I tried to discuss the interview with my parents over dinner, seeking some comfort after the disappointment. It didn't go as well as I'd hoped, I admitted. I was a bit distracted. Dad frowned. That's unfortunate. You need to focus on these opportunities, Megan. They don't come around every day. I know. But there were some unexpected issues this morning. My things had been moved around. And, are you blaming your poor interview on Emma again? Mom interrupted. This habit of dwelling on problems instead of solutions isn't helping your situation. I fell silent, pushing food around my plate. Emma, who'd been texting throughout dinner, suddenly looked up. I forgot to mention, one of Mom's friends is looking for someone to help with social media for her boutique, she said. It's just part-time, but it's something. Thanks, I murmured. Though the prospect of taking a job far below my qualifications and experience level, possibly arranged through family charity, felt like another step backward. After dinner, while doing dishes, I overheard Emma and Mom talking in the living room. I'm worried about her, Emma was saying. She seems stuck in this victim mentality. She's always been sensitive, Mom replied. Your father and I wonder if we sheltered her too much. Maybe what she needs is a push, Emma suggested. Sometimes tough love is the only way. Their voices lowered, and I couldn't hear the rest. Later that night, I discovered some of my books had been boxed up and moved to the basement to make room according to the note Mom left. The walls were closing in, and my supposed safe haven was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece. 1 week before everything came to a head, I returned from a networking event to find my bedroom door ajar. I distinctly remembered closing it before leaving, a habit I'd developed since Emma and Eric began staying with us. As I pushed it open, I froze at the sight of Emma sitting on my bed, my personal journal open in her hands. What are you doing? I gasped, rushing forward to snatch the journal away. It contained my private thoughts, job search frustrations, and even some venting about my family situation, things never meant for anyone else's eyes. Emma didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. I was looking for a phone charger and found this. Megan, some of the things you've written about us, about me, are really hurtful. You had no right to read my private journal, I said, my voice shaking with anger and violation. How did you even get in here? The door was locked. Emma glanced away. Mom gave me the spare key. In case of emergencies, the betrayal cut deep. My parents had given Emma unrestricted access to my personal space without even informing me. What other discussions had happened behind my back? This is unacceptable, I said, clutching the journal to my chest. I'm going to talk to Mom and Dad right now. I found my parents in the kitchen, Dad reading his tablet while Mom prepared tea. They looked up as I entered, Emma following close behind. Did you give Emma a key to my room? I demanded without preamble. Mom's expression confirmed it before she spoke. We did. This is our house, Megan, and we felt it was necessary. Necessary for what? To invade my privacy? She was reading my journal. Dad set down his tablet. Your mother found some concerning entries when she was cleaning your room last week. We're worried about your mental state. The hits kept coming. You went through my journal too? When you were supposedly cleaning? We've given you a place to stay, supported you through this difficult time, Mom said, her voice taking on the familiar tone of martyrdom. And this is how you repay us? Writing horrible things about how we favor Emma, how we're supposedly pressuring you. Because you are, I exploded, years of suppressed feelings finally breaking through. You've always held Emma's achievements above mine, always made me feel second best. And now you've given her unfettered access to my personal space while diminishing my basic need for privacy. Emma stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Mom's shoulder, the perfect picture of filial support. Megan, we're all concerned about you. This paranoia about your space. These accusations, it's not healthy. This isn't paranoia, I countered. You literally read my private journal after entering my locked room with a key I didn't know existed. Dad stood up, his expression hardening. That's enough, Megan. Your mother and I have actually been discussing this situation for some time now. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What situation? Your living arrangement, he continued. It's been nearly 5 months, and while we understand the job market is difficult, your attitude has become increasingly problematic. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My attitude? My boundaries were violated. My privacy disregarded. And you're concerned about my attitude? Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. We've sacrificed a lot to accommodate you, Megan. We delayed converting your room into the home office we planned for your father's pre-retirement consulting work. We've put up with your moods, your criticism of our parenting, which you read in my private journal, I interjected. And frankly, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. We're beginning to think this arrangement isn't working out. The implication hung in the air between us. I looked from Mom to Dad to Emma, who couldn't quite conceal her satisfaction. So you want me to move out? I asked quietly. In the middle of a housing crisis, with no job, because I dared to express my feelings in a private journal that you had no right to read? Dad sighed heavily. No one's saying you have to leave immediately. But Emma and Eric need more space for their renovation storage. And your attitude toward the situation has been less than cooperative. This was always the plan, wasn't it? I said, realization dawning. Emma never needed to stay here. She wanted my room, and you were looking for an excuse to ask me to leave anyway. That's not true, Mom protested, though her eyes flickered to Emma. Emma cleared her throat. I think I might have a compromise. The basement could be converted into a small bedroom for Megan. It's not ideal, but it would give everyone what they need. The basement. The unfinished, occasionally damp basement with concrete floors and inadequate lighting. The space where we stored holiday decorations and old furniture. That was what my sister considered a fair compromise. I pay rent to live here, I reminded them. We had an agreement. Circumstances change, Dad replied. Family needs change. I looked at each of their faces, truly seeing the dynamic for perhaps the first time. My parents, eager to please their successful daughter, willing to sacrifice their struggling one. Emma, manipulative and entitled as always. And me, the family disappointment, expected to accept whatever scraps were offered. I need some time to think, I said finally, turning to leave the kitchen. Megan, Mom called after me. We're just trying to find a solution that works for everyone. But as I climbed the stairs to my increasingly tenuous sanctuary, I knew that everyone didn't include me. In their eyes, my needs were secondary, my feelings invalid, my very presence conditional upon my compliance. That night, I lay awake replaying every family interaction throughout my life, seeing the pattern that had always existed but that I'd been too loyal to acknowledge. The childhood competitions where Emma's victories were celebrated more enthusiastically than mine. The college years where my academic achievements were met with mild approval, while Emma's social successes garnered genuine excitement. The subtle messaging that my path focused on career before marriage was somehow less valid. The next morning, I found a printed list of apartment listings on the kitchen counter. Mom didn't say anything when I discovered it, but the message was clear. Start making arrangements. The walls were closing in, and my time was running out. The day of the final betrayal began with a rare moment of hope. Dad mentioned that his boss, Richard Townsend, and his wife, Patricia, would be joining us for dinner. Richard was the CEO of the manufacturing company where Dad had worked for over 2 decades, and he also had connections in the marketing world. This could be a good networking opportunity for you, Megan, Dad said over breakfast. Richard's daughter works for Campbell Marketing Group. For the first time in weeks, I felt like my parents were actually considering my needs. Perhaps they'd reconsidered the pressure they'd been putting on me to leave. Maybe this dinner was their way of extending an olive branch, helping me with my job search rather than just pushing me out the door. I spent the entire day preparing. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, planned an impressive menu that showcased my culinary skills, and even made a special trip to the farmer's market for fresh ingredients. I chose a recipe for coco vin that I'd perfected during my time in Boston, supplemented with roasted seasonal vegetables and a chocolate soufflé for dessert. Mom seemed pleased with my initiative. "This is the kind of effort we've been hoping to see from you," she said, helping me arrange the dining room table with our best china. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. The house smelled wonderful, the table was elegantly set, and I'd even prepared talking points for my conversation with Richard. I wore a business casual outfit, wanting to appear professional but not overdressed for a family dinner. The Townsends arrived at 6:30, bringing an expensive bottle of wine that complemented our menu perfectly. Richard was a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence, while Patricia was elegantly dressed and warm in her greetings. "So lovely to finally meet you, Megan," Patricia said. "Jason and Karen talk about their children all the time." Emma and Eric arrived a few minutes later. Emma dressed as if for a cocktail party rather than a family dinner. She air-kissed the Townsends and immediately took over the conversation, steering it toward her renovation project and budding interior design business. "Richard, you remember I did the holiday decorations for the company party last year?" she gushed. "I've actually started taking on clients now. Patricia, I'd love to show you my portfolio sometime." As we moved to the table, I couldn't help but notice how my parents beamed at Emma's social prowess. Dad pulled out chairs for Patricia and Emma, while Mom directed Richard to the seat at the head of the table, opposite Dad. I ended up seated between Eric and Patricia, while Emma positioned herself directly across from Richard, perfectly placed to dominate the conversation. When I brought out the first course, a simple salad with homemade vinaigrette, Emma immediately spoke up. "Megan and I spent all day cooking," she announced. "Though she hadn't so much as chopped an onion. We wanted everything to be perfect for you both." I opened my mouth to correct her but caught Mom's warning glance. "Don't make a scene," her expression clearly conveyed. So I smiled tightly and served the salad without comment. As the meal progressed, I tried repeatedly to engage Richard in conversation about marketing trends or his daughter's company, only to have Emma interrupt with anecdotes about her clients or questions about the Townsends' vacation plans. My parents did nothing to redirect the conversation, seeming content to let Emma shine while I shuttled between kitchen and dining room, ensuring everything was served perfectly. When I brought out the coco vin, my pride and joy, Emma exclaimed, "This is an old family recipe. Mom taught us both, but Megan really perfected it." It wasn't a family recipe at all. I'd learned it from a French chef during a cooking class in Boston, but again, contradicting her would only create awkwardness. Throughout the meal, Richard occasionally tried to include me in the conversation. "Karen mentioned you worked in marketing for a tech startup, Megan. What kind of campaigns did you manage there?" Before I could fully answer, Emma would jump in with a related comment or question, effectively hijacking the conversation. My parents allowed it, even encouraged it, with Dad proudly elaborating on Emma's accomplishments while my professional experience was barely acknowledged. By the time dessert was served, I felt invisible in a dinner I had entirely prepared. When Patricia complimented the soufflé, Emma accepted the praise with a modest, "It's tricky to get the timing right, but we did our best." After the Townsends left, praising the lovely family dinner and promising to pass my resume to Richard's daughter, I began clearing the table while my parents and Emma chatted in the living room. Eric had disappeared upstairs immediately after dinner, claiming a work emergency. "Richard seemed impressed with you." I heard Dad tell Emma. He mentioned their home office could use a redesign. Oh, that would be a fantastic project, Emma replied. A high-profile client like Richard could really launch my business to the next level. I loaded the dishwasher, fighting back tears of frustration. The networking opportunity that had been presented as a chance for me had somehow transformed into another victory for Emma, with my parents' full support. As I finished cleaning the kitchen, Emma entered with an empty wine glass, leaning against the counter while I wiped down surfaces. "Great dinner," she said, her tone lighter now that the Townsends were gone. "By the way, I meant to tell you earlier, a few of my friends from the club are coming to stay next weekend. The Harringtons are having their annual gala, and everyone's making a weekend of it." I froze mid-wipe. "What do you mean, coming to stay? Here?" "Of course here," Emma replied. "There's plenty of room. They can use the guest room, and Julia and Mark can take your room." "My room?" I echoed incredulously. "Emma, I live here. You can't just offer my personal space to your friends." Emma's expression hardened. "Actually, I already discussed it with Mom and Dad. They agreed it would be fine." I marched into the living room, dish towel still in hand. "Did you tell Emma she could offer my room to her friends for some party next weekend?" My parents exchanged glances. Mom sighed heavily. "Emma mentioned her friends needed a place to stay. And we thought." "You thought what? That I would just vacate my space on command? That I have no say in who sleeps in my bed, uses my things?" Dad's face reddened. "That's enough, Megan. This attitude has gone on long enough. This is our house, and we decide how the rooms are used. I pay rent to live here," I reminded him, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "We had an agreement. An agreement that you'd be actively looking for work and your own place," Dad countered. "It's been 5 months, Megan. How many interviews have you actually had? How many applications have you sent out this week?" The accusation stung all the more because I had been working tirelessly on my job search, despite the increasingly hostile environment at home. "I've applied to 17 positions this week alone," I said quietly. "I've had 3 phone screenings and 1 second-round interview. I'm doing everything I can in a terrible job market." "Well, it's not enough," Dad declared, standing up. "Your mother and I have made a decision. Either you give up your room for Emma's renovation storage and move to the basement, or you need to find somewhere else to live. We've been more than patient, but enough is enough." There it was, the ultimatum delivered with cold finality. Emma didn't even try to hide her satisfied smile. "You're choosing Emma's convenience over my basic needs," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're telling me that having space for her furniture is more important than providing your daughter with a safe place to live during a financial crisis." "Don't be so dramatic," Mom scoffed. "The basement is perfectly habitable. We're not throwing you out on the street." "The basement flooded last spring," I reminded her. "It has no proper heating, no privacy, and barely any natural light." "Then perhaps you should consider your other option," Dad said firmly. "You're seriously telling me to get out? With no job? In this economy? With rents at record highs?" "You have friends," Emma chimed in helpfully. "What about Rachel? You two were always so close. Couldn't you stay with her for a while?" The fact that she'd clearly been thinking about where I could go once ousted from my childhood home was the final straw. "You have 48 hours to make your decision," Dad announced, as if delivering a business ultimatum rather than potentially making his daughter homeless. "Either move your things to the basement and help Emma set up in your room, or find alternative arrangements." I looked at each of their faces, Dad's stern resolve, Mom's detached disappointment, and Emma's poorly concealed triumph, and saw with perfect clarity what I meant to this family. I was an inconvenience, a burden, a problem to be solved rather than a daughter to be supported. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs to what had become, in their eyes, merely borrowed space in their home. As I closed the door behind me, I heard Emma asking, "Do you think she'll actually leave? She doesn't really have anywhere to go." That night, I stared at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down my face as I weighed impossible options. The basement wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unsuitable for long-term habitation. But where would I go? My savings had dwindled to less than 2 months' worth of normal rent, and without a steady income, No landlord would approve a lease application. The choice they'd presented wasn't really a choice at all. It was an erasure of my needs, my dignity, and ultimately, my place in the family. As dawn broke, I still hadn't slept, but something had solidified within me. A decision that would change everything. The morning after the ultimatum, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at Rachel's name on the screen. Rachel and I had been friends since college, and she was now working as a nurse at Boston General Hospital. We'd stayed in touch after I moved back home, though our communication had become less frequent as my family situation deteriorated. I hesitated, pride making my finger hover over the call button. Asking for help had never come easily to me, but I was running out of options. Finally, I pressed call, my heart pounding as the phone rang. "Megan?" Rachel answered, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything okay? It's not even 7 yet." "I'm sorry for calling so early," I said, my voice breaking slightly. I need some advice. And maybe help." Over the next 30 minutes, I poured out everything. Emma's manipulation, my parents' betrayal, the ultimatum, all of it. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds of disbelief or sympathy. Jesus, Meg, that's awful," she said when I finished. "They're really treating you like this?" "I don't know what to do," I admitted, wiping away tears. "The basement isn't a viable living space, but I can't afford an apartment yet. I've been applying everywhere, but the market is brutal." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "You know," she finally said, "Jen moved in with her boyfriend last month. I've been meaning to look for a roommate, but I've been so busy with shifts. The second bedroom is tiny, but it's yours if you need it. Just until you get back on your feet." Relief and gratitude washed over me. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "Megan, listen to me," Rachel said firmly. "What your family is doing isn't normal or okay. This is conditional love at its worst. You deserve better, and sometimes chosen family is more supportive than blood relatives." As Rachel's words sank in, something shifted inside me. I'd been so focused on trying to earn my parents' approval, to justify my presence in their home, that I hadn't questioned whether I should have to. "The rent would be $600 plus utilities," Rachel continued. "I know that's tight on savings, but it's better than the alternative, right?" It was more than I could comfortably afford without income, but it was a lifeline, a way out of an increasingly toxic situation. "Thank you," I whispered. "I can't tell you what this means to me." After hanging up, I sat in silence, contemplating the decision before me. Leaving meant uncertainty, financial strain, and admitting that my family dynamic was broken beyond my power to fix it. Staying meant sacrificing my dignity and accepting that I would always be valued less than my sister. When faced with those options, the choice became startlingly clear. I spent the morning taking inventory of my belongings, sorting them into categories. Essentials I'd take immediately, items I could retrieve later, and things I might need to leave behind. My professional clothes, laptop, and portfolio were non-negotiable. My book collection, sadly, would have to wait. As I sorted through my closet, I came across a small wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were savings bonds my grandparents had given me for birthdays and Christmases throughout my childhood. I'd forgotten about them completely. With trembling fingers, I counted them 15 bonds in total, most of which had fully matured. They wouldn't make me rich, but they represented a few $1,000s I hadn't accounted for enough to give me breathing room while job hunting. "Thanks, Grandma," I whispered, clutching the bonds to my chest. It felt like a sign, a reminder that someone had believed in my future enough to invest in it. By midday, I'd formed a plan. I would accept Rachel's offer, using my savings and the bonds to cover rent until I found employment. I'd take only what would fit in my car for now and arrange to collect the rest later. Most importantly, I would leave with my self-respect intact. As I packed the first suitcase, memories flooded back: childhood birthdays, high school graduation, the day I left for college, with such hope and ambition. This house had once been my safe haven, my parents, my biggest supporters. When had that changed? Had it always been conditional, and I'd been too loyal to notice? Around 2 o'clock, I heard Emma and my mother return from shopping. Their laughter drifted up the stairs, carefree and unconcerned about the ultimatum hanging over my head. I continued packing methodically, refusing to let their indifference rush me. Eventually, there was a knock at my door. Mom entered without waiting for a response, her eyes widening at the sight of my open suitcases. "What are you doing?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "Making my choice?" I replied calmly, folding a sweater. She frowned. "Don't be dramatic, Megan. No one's forcing you to leave. The basement is a perfectly reasonable alternative." I stopped packing and looked at her directly. "Is it? Would you want to live down there, Mom? Would you put Emma there?" "That's different," she said dismissively. "Emma has her own home. She's just staying here temporarily. And I was supposed to be staying temporarily too. The difference is, I needed this safety net. Emma doesn't." Mom's expression hardened. "Your father and I have been more than generous. We've supported you for months while you've made little progress finding a job." "I've been trying," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt. "Every day I've been applying, networking, improving my skills. But instead of support, I've received judgment. Instead of understanding, I've had my privacy violated. Instead of compassion, I've been given an ultimatum." "You're twisting things," Mom protested. "We're just trying to accommodate everyone's needs." "Everyone except mine," I pointed out. "But it's okay. I've made my decision. I'm leaving." A flash of panic crossed her face. "Leaving? Where would you even go?" "I have friends, Mom. People who value me as I am, not for what I can provide or how well I conform to their expectations." She paled slightly. "You're being ridiculous. Your father will be very disappointed." "I'm disappointed too," I said quietly. "In both of you." Mom stood there for a moment longer, perhaps waiting for me to recant, to apologize for standing my ground. When I simply returned to packing, she left without another word. That evening, after filling my car with the essentials, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. In it, I explained my decision without anger or blame, simply stating how their actions had made me feel and why I couldn't accept their conditions. I acknowledged my gratitude for the support they had provided, but asserted my need for respect and dignity. I didn't slam doors behind me. I left them cracked open for a healthier relationship in the future, should they choose to walk through. As I placed the sealed envelope on my neatly made bed, I felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I was losing something, the illusion of unconditional family support, but gaining something possibly more valuable, self-respect and the freedom to define my own worth. With one last look around the room that had witnessed my growth from child to woman, I picked up my final bag and walked downstairs. Emma was in the kitchen with Mom, discussing renovation plans as if my life-altering decision was of no consequence. Dad was in his usual chair, watching the evening news. "I'm leaving now," I announced from the doorway. Dad looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Leaving? Where are you going at this hour?" "I've made arrangements with a friend in Boston. I've left a letter explaining everything." Emma's expression flickered between shock and satisfaction. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to actually leave. "You're being impulsive," Dad said, rising from his chair. "Let's discuss this rationally." "We're past discussion," I replied calmly. "You gave me an ultimatum, and I've made my choice. I choose self-respect." "Megan," Mom began, her tone softening now that my departure was imminent. "Don't you think you're overreacting?" "No," I said simply. "I don't. Goodbye." With those words, I walked out the door, carrying only 2 suitcases but feeling lighter than I had in months. As I drove away from the house I'd grown up in, tears streamed down my face, not from regret, but from the bittersweet recognition of truth. Sometimes choosing yourself is the hardest choice, but also the most necessary. The 2-hour drive to Boston passed in a blur of highways and processing emotions. Rachel was waiting outside her apartment building when I arrived. Her familiar face, a beacon of comfort in the storm of uncertainty I'd willingly entered. "You really did it," she said, helping me carry a suitcase up the 3 flights to her apartment. "I'm proud of you, Meg." Her words, so simple yet so profound, broke something open inside me. When was the last time someone had expressed pride in my choices, rather than disappointment? Rachel's apartment was small but welcoming, decorated with plants and colorful artwork. The second bedroom was indeed tiny, barely fitting a twin bed and small dresser, but it was clean, bright, and mine, a space where I wouldn't have to defend my right to exist. "It's not much," Rachel apologized, setting down my suitcase. "It's perfect," I assured her, and meant it. My phone had been buzzing continuously during the drive, but I'd ignored it, needing space to process. Now, in the safety of Rachel's apartment, I finally checked the notifications. 12 missed calls from Mom, 5 from Dad, and numerous text messages ranging from guilt-inducing, "How could you do this to us?" to threatening, "You've left us no choice but to donate your remaining things if you don't come get them immediately." The most telling message came from Emma. "Everyone's freaking out. They didn't think you'd actually leave." Dad's furious. Of course they hadn't thought I'd leave. They'd expected me to cave, to accept the basement, or any other humiliation they imposed, because I needed them more than they needed me. My actual departure had disrupted their narrative, forcing them to confront the consequences of their ultimatum. I silenced my phone and helped Rachel make up the bed with fresh sheets. That night, exhausted but resolute, I slept more soundly than I had in months. The next morning, reality set in. I was essentially starting over at 28, no job, minimal savings once rent was accounted for, and a fractured relationship with my family. But for the first time since losing my job, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was taking control of my life rather than passively accepting others' definitions of my worth. I spent the day updating my resume, setting up a proper workspace at Rachel's dining table, and creating a strict budget that would stretch my savings as far as possible. The bonds from my grandparents would buy me approximately 3 months before financial panic would set in. On the third day, as I was researching affordable health insurance options, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Megan Murphy?" a professional female voice inquired. "Yes. Speaking," I replied cautiously. "This is Jennifer Townsend from Campbell Marketing Group. My father, Richard, mentioned meeting you at dinner recently. He was quite impressed and suggested I reach out." My breath caught. Richard Townsend had actually followed through, despite the awkward family dynamics he'd witnessed. "I appreciate that," I said, trying to sound composed. "Your father mentioned you work in marketing." "I'm the Senior Director of Client Services," Jennifer explained. "We're actually looking for someone to join our digital team. Based on what Dad described about your background, you might be a good fit. Would you be interested in coming in for an interview?" It wasn't a job offer, just an interview opportunity, but it felt like the first real break I'd had in months. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, and I immediately dove into researching the company and preparing my portfolio. That evening, my father called. After 3 days of ignored messages, I finally felt ready to answer. "Megan," he said, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. "What do you think you're doing?" "I made my choice, Dad," I replied calmly. "You gave me an ultimatum, and I chose the option that preserved my self-respect. This is ridiculous. You've upset your mother tremendously. Emma feels terrible." I doubted the latter very much, but didn't contradict him. "I'm sorry you're all upset, but I was clear about my boundaries. They weren't respected." "Boundaries," he scoffed. "This family bent over backward to accommodate you during a difficult time, and this is how you repay us? By running away like a child?" I didn't run away. I corrected him. I made a deliberate adult decision to remove myself from a situation where I was being devalued. There's a difference. The conversation continued in circles, with Dad alternating between guilt tactics and demands that I return immediately. I remained firm but calm, neither apologizing for my choice nor escalating the conflict with accusations. When we finally hung up, I felt drained but solid in my decision. Over the next week, a pattern emerged in my family's responses. Dad remained angry, viewing my departure as a personal affront to his authority. Mom vacillated between tearful pleas for reconciliation and passive-aggressive jabs about my abandonment of the family. Emma, according to mutual family friends, was busy spinning a narrative that cast me as mentally unstable and ungrateful. "Apparently, I'm having a quarter-life crisis," I told Rachel wryly after a cousin called to check on my emotional state. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Of course. Heaven forbid they acknowledge their part in this. Despite the family drama, my professional prospects were looking up. The interview with Jennifer Townsend went surprisingly well. She was impressed with my portfolio and previous campaign results, and we connected on a personal level. Dad mentioned there was some family tension that night, she said as the interview was wrapping up. I hope everything's okay. I gave a diplomatic response about different perspectives on my career path, which wasn't untrue, just incomplete. Jennifer nodded sympathetically. Been there. My father wanted me to join his company right out of college, but I needed to forge my own path first. Took him years to understand. 2 days later, I received an offer from Campbell Marketing Group. The salary was slightly lower than my previous position but included health benefits and growth potential. Most importantly, it was a steady income that would allow me to support myself independently. The same day I accepted the job offer, I received my first rent check for my first month's rent. Seeing the significant reduction in my savings was sobering, but also empowering. This was the cost of my freedom, an investment in my self-worth. With employment secured, I began searching for my own apartment. Boston rents were steep, but I found a small studio within my budget in a less trendy neighborhood. It would be tight financially for a while, but manageable with careful planning. When I called my parents to share the news about my job and apartment, hoping they might see that I was building a stable life, their response was tepid at best. That's nice, dear, Mom said distractedly. Did you know Emma's renovation has been featured in the local magazine? They're doing a whole spread. The continued dismissal of my achievements stung, but not as deeply as before. Their approval was no longer the currency I traded in. 2 weeks after I left, Dad called with an unexpected proposition. Your mother and I have been thinking, he began, his tone businesslike. We're willing to let you come back. No basement required. Emma's friends found other arrangements for the gala weekend. I was momentarily speechless. The generous offer completely missed the point of why I'd left. Dad, I appreciate that, but I've accepted a job in Boston. I'm signing a lease on an apartment this week. You're really going through with this? He asked incredulously. Throwing away family support over a petty disagreement? It wasn't petty to me, I replied. And I'm not throwing away anything. I'm building something new, a life where my worth isn't conditional. He hung up without saying goodbye. As I settled into my new job and tiny studio apartment, the whirlwind of change gradually calmed. The work at Campbell was challenging but fulfilling. My colleagues welcoming and professional. My apartment, though small, became a sanctuary decorated entirely to my taste and needs. 1 month after leaving home, I received an unexpected email from Richard Townsend himself, congratulating me on my work on a particularly successful campaign. Jennifer speaks very highly of your contributions to the team, he wrote. I'm glad our dinner conversation led to this opportunity. The validation from someone who had witnessed my family's dynamics firsthand, who had seen how they diminished me, felt like vindication. I was valuable, competent, and worthy of respect. My family's inability to see that was their loss, not a reflection of my worth. That evening, I sat on the fire escape of my apartment building, watching the sunset over the Boston skyline. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt at peace with my choices. The path forward wasn't certain or easy, but it was mine, carved by my own hands rather than shaped by others' expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate 1 month of independence? I smiled and replied, absolutely. I'm bringing the wine. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life I was proud to claim as my own. 6 months after walking out of my parents' house with just 2 suitcases, I stood in my studio apartment, surrounded by the life I'd rebuilt. The space was small, but distinctly mine, decorated with thrift store finds, plants that thrived under my care, and framed prints of places I hope to visit someday. My job at Campbell Marketing Group had evolved from a lifeline to a genuine career opportunity, with Jennifer mentoring me toward a potential promotion. My weekly therapy sessions had become a cornerstone of my healing process. Dr. Linden, a compassionate woman in her 50s, helped me recognize the toxic patterns in my family that I'd normalized throughout my life. Your parents created a dynamic where love and approval were contingent on compliance, she explained during one particularly illuminating session. Emma learned to thrive within that system by becoming what they wanted. You resisted, valuing authenticity over conformity, which made you the designated problem child, regardless of your actual behavior. Understanding the dynamics intellectually didn't immediately heal the emotional wounds, but it provided context for my experiences. I wasn't oversensitive or ungrateful. I had been responding to genuine emotional manipulation and conditional love. My relationship with my parents remained strained but evolving. After 3 months of minimal contact, Mom began reaching out more consistently, her messages gradually shifting from guilt-inducing to cautiously respectful. Dad remained more distant, uncomfortable with the new boundaries I'd established, but he no longer demanded my return or dismissed my choices outright. "I miss you," Mom admitted during one phone call, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "The house feels different without you." "I miss aspects of home too," I replied honestly. "But I needed to create this space for myself." "I've been thinking about what you said in your letter," she continued, surprising me. I hadn't been sure they'd even read it. About feeling like your needs always came second to Emma's. I didn't see it that way at the time, but looking back, maybe there's some truth to it. It wasn't a full acknowledgement or apology, but it was the first crack in the wall of denial. Small steps, I reminded myself. Healing family relationships took time, if it happened at all. Emma's renovation had long since been completed, revealing what I'd suspected all along: she hadn't actually needed my room for storage or herself for accommodation. According to Mom, they'd barely disturbed the space, moving only a few pieces of furniture temporarily. The whole conflict had been about power and precedence, not practical necessity. Emma herself remained resentful of my departure and the subsequent shift in family dynamics. When I didn't return as expected, she lost her leverage and, to some extent, her special status as the cooperative daughter. My absence forced our parents to redirect some of their attention and emotional energy, which Emma clearly resented. "She asks about you sometimes," Mom mentioned during one call. "In her own way, I think she misses the relationship you used to have." I doubted this assessment. The relationship we used to have had been built on my acquiescence to Emma's needs and acceptance of secondary status. Of course, she missed that dynamic. It had served her perfectly. While navigating the complexity of my family relationships, I was simultaneously building a support system of chosen family. Rachel remained my closest friend and staunchest advocate. Through her, I met new people who accepted me as I was, without the weight of family history or expectations. Bailey, my work colleague who became a close friend, introduced me to a weekly trivia night where I connected with others who shared my interests and values. Jordan, a graphic designer I collaborated with on projects, invited me to join his book club. Gradually, I constructed a community around myself, one based on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than obligation. 4 months after leaving home, I received my first performance review at Campbell Marketing. Jennifer praised my initiative, creativity, and collaborative approach, recommending a modest raise and expanded responsibilities. "You've exceeded our expectations," she told me. "Your campaign for the Harris account generated a 22% increase in engagement metrics. The client specifically mentioned your strategic approach in their feedback." The professional validation bolstered my confidence, reinforcing that I was on the right path despite the difficult choices that had led me here. I celebrated by treating myself to dinner at a restaurant I'd been wanting to try, texting photos of each course to Rachel, who was working a night shift. 5 months in, I experienced an unexpected connection that further expanded my world. While working on a nonprofit campaign at Campbell, I met Lucas, a development director for an educational foundation. Our professional collaboration evolved into coffee meetings to discuss marketing strategies, which gradually shifted toward more personal conversations. Lucas was thoughtful and perceptive, with a quiet confidence I found compelling. Unlike previous relationships where I'd often diminished my needs to maintain harmony, I approached this connection with new awareness of my boundaries and worth. "My family situation is complicated," I explained during one of our conversations. "I'm still figuring out what healthy relationships look like for me." Instead of being put off by my candor, Lucas appreciated it. "Aren't we all?" he replied. "My parents divorced when I was 12, and the fallout taught me a lot about what I don't want to repeat in my own relationships. His understanding created space for authentic connection without pressure or expectation. Whether our relationship developed further or remained a friendship, it represented growth in how I allowed others to know and value the real me. As the 6-month mark of my independence approached, Mom called with an unexpected invitation. "We'd like you to come for dinner next weekend," she said, a note of nervousness in her voice. "Your father's birthday is coming up, and, well, we'd love to see you." I hesitated. Memories of the last family dinner still vivid in my mind. "Who else will be there?" "Just us," she assured me. "Emma and Eric are traveling that weekend." The timing seemed deliberate, a chance to reconnect without the complications Emma's presence would introduce. After discussing it with Dr. Linden, I decided to accept the invitation, setting clear boundaries for myself about the visit's duration and my willingness to discuss certain topics. The drive back to Connecticut felt surreal, familiar landscapes now viewed through the lens of my transformed life. As I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I was struck by how ordinary it looked, just a house, not the emotional battleground it had become in my memory. Mom opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a hesitant hug. "You look wonderful," she said, stepping back to examine me. "Boston agrees with you." Dad was more reserved but managed a genuine smile. "Good to see you, Megan." The dinner itself was surprisingly pleasant. They asked questions about my job and apartment, showing more interest in my life than they had during my months living under their roof. I shared carefully edited versions of my experiences, maintaining the boundaries I'd established while still allowing for connection. After dessert, as we sat in the living room with coffee, Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been doing some thinking since you left," he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "We may not have been entirely fair in how we handled things." Coming from my father, this halting acknowledgement was the equivalent of a dramatic apology. I waited, giving him space to continue. "We got caught up in trying to help Emma with her renovation and lost sight of your situation," he continued. "The ultimatum was, well, it was poorly handled." Mom nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "We were wrong, Megan. About a lot of things. I've been talking with Aunt Sarah about it all, and she helped me see how we've sometimes treated you and Emma differently." I took a deep breath, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. "It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it." "We're proud of you," Dad added, the words clearly difficult for him to express. "For landing on your feet, finding a good job. You've always been capable and independent, sometimes too independent for your old dad to understand." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were still wounds that needed healing, patterns that needed changing. But it was an opening, an opportunity to build something healthier than what had existed before. As I drove back to Boston that night, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. I'd lost the security of family support but gained self-determination. I'd sacrificed comfort for dignity. And in the process, I'd discovered that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Emma remained a complicated presence in my life. During a brief phone conversation the following week, her resentment was palpable. "So you're the prodigal daughter now," she remarked after I mentioned visiting for Dad's birthday. "One dinner and all is forgiven?" "It's not about forgiveness, Emma," I replied calmly. "It's about building a healthier relationship moving forward." "Easy for you to say. You're not here dealing with Mom's constant questions about when you're coming to visit again." The old pattern tugged at me: apologize, smooth things over, put Emma's feelings first. But I resisted. "I'm sorry, that's frustrating for you," I said instead. "I hope we can find our own way to a better relationship too, when you're ready." 1 year after the ultimatum that changed everything, I hosted my parents at my apartment in Boston. I'd moved to a slightly larger 1-bedroom place, still modest but comfortable enough to entertain guests. The visit wasn't perfect. Dad made a few tone-deaf comments about my starter apartment, and Mom couldn't help rearranging my kitchen cabinets, but the fundamental dynamic had shifted. I was no longer seeking their approval or permission. I was an adult woman welcoming her parents into the life she had built on her own terms. They were guests now, not authorities, a distinction that changed everything about our interaction. That evening, After they left to drive back to Connecticut, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights come alive as dusk settled. My phone buzzed with a message from Lucas, asking how the visit had gone. Below it was a text from Rachel suggesting brunch the next day, and an email notification about a potential promotion at work. This was my life now built from scratch after the painful revelation that sometimes family love came with conditions too costly to accept. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it had led me to a place of greater authenticity and strength than I'd ever known before. The ultimatum my parents delivered that night, give up the room or get out of this house, had been intended as a threat, a way to force my compliance. Instead, it became the catalyst for my liberation. I chose to leave, to stand up for my worth, to build a life defined by my own values rather than others' expectations. It was the hardest choice I'd ever made. And looking back from where I stood now, it was also the most necessary. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for yourself meant potentially losing relationships that mattered to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose ourselves, even when it feels impossible. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect and dignity too. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth is never conditional on someone else's approval. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.